I want to bring in Democratic Congressman from Texas, Joaquin Castro. He's a member of the Intelligence Committee. Thanks for joining us, Congressman. Along with the former officials we just listed, the DOJ has also purged 35 employees who worked on the January 6th investigations in Trump's classified documents case. California Senator Adam Schiff and New York AG Letitia James are under investigation for mortgage fraud. A Fed governor now targeted for a similar allegation. Should critics of this president or people he wants out of the way be concerned? What precedent is this setting?
People should absolutely be concerned. I mean, these are the acts of an authoritarian leader, somebody who is striving to be a dictator. You know, he had that very passive aggressive statement yesterday about maybe some Americans want a dictator. It's all about retribution and revenge. And it's not only meant to punish the people who have been critical of President Trump, it's also meant to squelch or cancel any future criticism by other people. Because what happens is he wants people to see what's happening to those old enemies and get scared to say anything critical of him. And I think that's why he's doing this.
President Trump even mentioned former President Biden and his staff yesterday. Watch.
It was the radical lunatics that surrounded this guy at this desk who are brilliant people, but with the wrong philosophy. There were some brilliant people, but they're evil people, and they're going to be brought down. They have to be brought down because they really hurt our country. But we're getting it back very quickly.
Your reaction to that, especially that phrase, brought down. And do you think Trump will succeed?
He's weaponizing the government to go after people that he disagrees with and that have been critical of him. And a few of the ways that he's done that is that he's gotten people appointed to his cabinet who, first of all, it's the most unqualified cabinet in American history. But he's gotten people who will never tell him no, people who will only do exactly what he wants them to do. And then he goes and fires other people like the director of the NSA, Lieutenant General Cruz recently of the DIA. So these people that are career military or intelligence professionals who are trying to provide basically an objective analysis on things, he fires them because he doesn't want experts. He wants enablers. He wants sycophants. And we see that over and over again. Same thing when he fired the person that headed the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He wants somebody that's going to contribute to his narrative and his story and make sure that he's always right. And it's getting increasingly dangerous.
He claims it's about ending the weaponization of the government.
Well, that's not the case at all. I mean, you can just see what's going on in terms of who they're prosecuting, who he's going after, how he's basically behaving, how he's using the federal government, and not just on this, but putting ICE agents on the street with no warrant, in masks, not identifying themselves, snatching people off the street, now occupying American cities, Washington, D.C., and threatening to occupy more American cities. These are the actions of somebody who is aspiring to be a dictator.
Quickly, if you will, is there anything you on the Intelligence Committee can do about this?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, the answer is yes. There are things that we can do. Part of the challenge is that you have a Republican Congress that is basically doing whatever Donald Trump wants them to do. And they're scared to challenge him in any way. So if you ask the question, well, can you guys bring people in and do an investigation? Yes, we could if the Republican majority would actually issue the subpoenas to do it. So there are investigations that Congress should have already done that have not been done. Even, for example, the Epstein files. All of that should be a full investigation. That is not what's happening. Same thing on intelligence issues. There are a lot of things that we could have taken up that we haven't. But yes, we absolutely should.
Well, we do know that on the Epstein files, there is an ongoing investigation now in the Oversight Committee, at least in the House. Congressman Joaquin Castro, appreciate you providing your insights, your perspective on these matters. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.